We've made it! It's the last level of grammar analysis, where we look at clauses, sentence structure, and sentence purpose. And we're going to start today by looking at clauses. So there are two types of clauses, independent and dependent clauses. But before we get to the distinctions, let's just talk about what a clause is in general. A clause is a group of words that contains a subject-predicate set. And if you'll remember from last level, phrases are groups of words that do not have subject-predicate sets. So clauses are sort of their opposite because they do have those subject-predicate sets. And the word clause actually comes from the same root as the words for claustrophobia, enclosure, and close. So the idea is that a clause is a closing. The subject opens the topic and the predicate closes it. The subject introduces and the predicate concludes. This 1-2 structure opens and closes an idea. And every clause has this subject-predicate set at its center. At a minimum, it'll have one subject-predicate set, so it'll have one clause, but it might also have many others. So check out this example sentence. When my mom tells me, order pizza, I call Domino's. Each color corresponds to a different clause, and within each clause, a subject-predicate set is underlined. So in purple, mom is a subject and tells is a predicate. In blue, there's an implied subject of you with a predicate of order. And in green, I is a subject and call is a predicate. So an independent clause is a clause that can stand alone as a sentence. It expresses a complete thought. A dependent clause, or what is sometimes called a subordinate clause, on the other hand, doesn't express a complete thought and it can't stand alone. Therefore, it has to be connected to an independent clause. And our vocab roots can actually help us out here to remember the difference. So de means down and pend means hang. So a dependent clause is a clause that does not make sense unless it can hang on to an independent clause, kind of like our friend Kermit here. Dependent clauses often begin with subordinating conjunctions like if or as or since or because. Now let's return to our sample sentence. Here, the independent clauses are green and the dependent clause is purple. The dependent clause is when my mom tells me, and it leaves us hanging. Tells me what? To do my homework? To go shopping? To stop sitting on my little sister? If I don't finish the sentence, I'll never know what my mom wants me to do. Dependent clauses can be a little bit stressful if you don't finish the thought. So since it leaves me hanging, it's a dependent clause. Dependent clauses can't be used as sentences by themselves, so they depend on independent clauses for meaning. They can be placed before, after, or sometimes even in the middle of independent clauses. They can occur in different places in the sentences. As you can see in the examples below, all of the bold words are parts of dependent clauses. Some are in the beginning, some are in the middle, some are at the end of the sentences. Now, there are also 3 different types of dependent clauses: adjectives, adverbs, and nouns, and they act just like those parts of speech act. I'm not going to hold you responsible for labeling the type of dependent clause in a sentence, but I am going to give you a quick overview so you know the difference among the 3 types. Our first type is an adjective-dependent clause, which is also known as a relative clause. So an adjective-dependent clause usually follows a noun or pronoun, and because it's acting like an adjective, modifies that noun or pronoun. Usually begins with relative pronouns, and I've got a list of those in the yellow box here. For example, in our sentence below, I said, the man who followed you turned left. So the question I have is, which man? And my clause, who followed you, tells me which one. Therefore, it's functioning as an adjective. We also have adverb-dependent clauses, which, as the name implies, acts like an adverb. These ones usually start with subordinating conjunctions. And I've got some example sentences down in blue. I jumped when he honked the horn. If you like it, you can have it. As you know, the final is worth 20% of your grade. All of those clauses start with subordinating conjunctions, when, if, and as. And you'll see I've got a big list of them in the yellow box. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll also notice that some of these words can double as other parts of speech. After, for instance, can be a preposition, and as we saw on the previous slide, that can be a relative pronoun. Also, whenever and wherever can be adverbs, such as when Shakira uses them. Whenever, wherever, we're meant to be together. Here she's using them as adverbs rather than as subordinating conjunctions, which I'm sure was definitely part of her songwriting process. Now, like everything else we've learned about grammar, we know that we don't need to memorize a list like this, but we need to question how the word or group of words is functioning within the sentence. So in the case of a clause, first ask yourself what the subject-predicate pair is, and then you ask yourself if it's a complete thought, and if it's not, what part of speech might it be acting as? The last type of a dependent clause would be the noun-dependent clause, which, surprise, acts like a noun. And just to keep things exciting, noun clauses can start with relative pronouns or subordinating conjunctions. Because they act like nouns, these clauses can do all the things a noun can do. It could be the subject of a sentence, like my purple example sentence. What I saw in the theater gave me nightmares. What I saw in the theater is the subject, gave is the predicate, and if you're paying attention, nightmares is the direct object and me is the indirect object. Now, all I have to say about the ring is that I slept with a blanket draped over the TV in my room for a solid month. Noun clauses can also act as direct objects, as in the blue sentence. I wish that my kids would look at the camera at the same time. And in that case, I is the subject, wish is the predicate, and that my kids would look at the camera at the same time is a noun clause that functions as a direct object. Seriously, this is a complete mystery to me. They wouldn't look at the camera when they got their haircuts. They wouldn't do it for their birthday party. And they also wouldn't do it for Thanksgiving. So at this point, I've just resigned myself to not having a solid picture of my kids together for at least 5 years. Now, to wrap things up for today, let's put together what we learned about clauses with what we already know about phrases. So pause the video here and then review the underlined portions of these sentences and jot down if they're clauses or phrases. To challenge yourself, see if you can identify what type of phrase or clause each underlined portion is.